We're here with UFC legend Burt Watson, once named a babysitter to the stars by Joe Rogan. How are you, Burt?
Oh, I'm trying to make it, baby. Are we live? Are we live, baby?
So I know you spent 15 years with the MMA. How did you get into the boxing scene and get your job with the UFC?
I spent 15 years with 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 MMA. Actually, I started in MMA in 2000, and I'm still kind of in MMA. So this is 2021. So that's a little longer, but that's pretty easy math, you know. But before coming to the UFC, where I started my MMA career, I was in boxing, and I became a boxing fan back in 1969, baby. If you can calculate that far back. But I became a boxing fan, and I met Joe Frazier kind of randomly in 1971. And fast forward, we kind of kept communications, which was a little different back in those days. We had no computers, we had no internet, and we had no cell phone. So you were a man of your word. You were a man of your word, and we kept touch. We kept communicating, and as time went on, he and his boxing career. First real big boxing event that I ever really saw and focused in on was March 8th, 1971, when Joe Frazier fought Muhammad Ali in Madison Square Garden in New York. And that was pretty spectacular for me, because it was the first one that I really paid attention to. And just fast forward a little bit, Joe, through his career, through that amazing career, those 3 fights with Muhammad Ali, with the Thrill in Manila, and the 2 New York fights, and it was just amazing. Fast forward, we kept communication, and I'd say maybe 8, 9 years later, we communicated again. We have been communicated in and out, but living in 2 different worlds. Joe Frazier was Joe Frazier, heavyweight champion in the world. And on one spectrum, I basically had just gotten out of the Marine Corps. I spent 3 years in the Marine Corps. I had just gotten out of the Marine Corps, moved to New York. And I actually started in fashion. I went to school for fashion design. And that was the road that I had chose to try to travel down. And, so we were on different planes and different paths, but our paths crossed, we met. Our paths went different ways, different directions again. And later in life, we met again. And this time when we met again, our friendship grew to a work relationship. And I ended up working with Smoking Joe Frazier and becoming his manager and working in boxing. And the rest from that point, it's just kind of escalated and grew from that point on.
So just like you said, you were Smoking Joe's manager.
Yes, sir.
We know that he probably had the biggest MMA rivalry with Muhammad Ali. Can you give us any insight on that matchup and the emotion going through both parties when they fought each other?
Well, I will say to today, and without everybody. Now I'm going to speak as a sports fan, but it's going to sound like I'm a little biased. But as even today, in 2021, the 3 fights that Joe Frazier had with Muhammad Ali were 3 of the greatest heavyweight fights I've ever seen. The culmination of the 3. They both were huge guys. They both were huge, massive sports stars. They both had huge personalities in different ways, but they both had huge personalities. And the 3 fights that they had at the time were polarizing. the country, the world, the sports world, the sport of professional boxing, the world itself. And when I say the world, I mean the world, because the two of those guys transcended the sport itself, and their personalities and the magnitude of those events was worldwide. It was global. So, but the polarization, you just had sports fan. One guy was for the brash young Muhammad Ali. The other one was for the man's man, Joe Frazier, the hard worker. The country kid that was digging the ditches, and that whole thing. But it was definitely amazing to see that sport or that time and that era go. And it was my first exposure to sports and athletes at a very high level. And it was unbelievable. Still today, I watch boxing today, and I follow boxing, and I follow some of the heavyweights, but I'm an OG diehard, baby. It's Smoking Joe, Muhammad Ali, George Foreman, Larry Holmes, Ken Norton, Floyd Patterson. It's back those days, and then it transcended on. The sport kind of transcended to a different era. You had the era of Sugar Ray Leonard and De La Hoya, and the era of Roy Jones and then Mike Tyson. So it transcended on. But those two guys and those three fights put the sport on a global stage, and it made it a global sport, and it transcended throughout the world.
You were considered a big part of the UFC backstage, but after complications with Mark Munoz, you didn't attend UFC 184. Can you take us through what happened that day and what led to your departure from the UFC?
Okay, well, let me ask you a question, because you just said you mentioned about Mark Munoz and yada yada yada, and tell me what you heard happen, and I'll tell you what really happened. How's that?
Okay, so I heard that you eventually, after Mark Munoz couldn't get the same weight that he needed to fight, you dropped him off at a hotel or something like that. You stayed. I guess you were done with your job, and Mark Munoz had to stay for another ride, and he didn't get it. So apparently he was 10 minutes from the hotel that he was going to, but he had to wait an hour to get a ride, and a UFC, I don't know, administrator called you and blamed you for it, but that's all I have.
Oh, well, you know what? You're probably the first one that's got it almost right. Okay? Because we were in California. The fight was in California. Mark Munoz was the main event. And correct me if I'm wrong now. But we had the weigh-in. Very true. It was the weigh-in. And Mark Munoz didn't make weight originally the very first time. So he had to, when you get on the scale to make weight, if you don't make weight, depending on where you are, the state that you're in, and the state rules, and the athletic commission, and so forth, supposedly, if you don't make weight, you get an hour to cut that weight and make the weight, or make whatever the agreed upon weight is going to be, whether they change it to a catch weight or whatever. But if you get on the scale and you're supposed to be 190 and you get on the scale and you're 193, you got 1 hour to come back at least 191. So Mark Munoz got on the scale. He didn't make the weight the weight that was contracted for the fight, and he left to make weight. So I sat at the arena and I waited for Mark to come back, and I waited and I waited, and finally he came back. He hopped up on the scale and he made weight. I'm a firm believer in discipline, and that's kind of how I ran my situation and how I coordinated events. I had to be very disciplined and on time and all those things. And so everyone else in that time frame had to also be very disciplined. So he came back, he made weight, and I had my little say-so with him for not making weight. And I said to him, if that happens again, you know I'm not gonna be happy. So at the time, we had vehicles that took fighters from the hotel to the place that we made weight. The hotel and where the weigh-in was only 10 minutes away. It was probably less than that. It was walking distance. It was literally 4 blocks away, but in the city, you go a block, you have to go around the blocks and so forth. So I got out, he made weight, I'm good. I told my guys, get the scale, put the scale. And I looked at Mark and I said to him, the very next time that you don't make weight, I'm really gonna be unhappy. So I got in the car and I had the driver take me to the hotel, which was 5 minutes away. He took me to the hotel, and when he dropped me off, I said to him, go back and get Mark. So he did. Now, unless that driver drove from LA to Las Vegas, there's no way in HE double hockey sticks that it took him that long to go get Mark. So that part of the story was not, he was there. But then at the same time, I really wasn't too concerned because Mark was one of my children that didn't do right. So Dad was going to discipline him. So I didn't mind if he walked back to the hotel, which was only 5 minutes away because he didn't make weight. So that was my frame of mind. Go back and see if you can see Mark. If you get in, fine. If you don't, because they all knew how to get back to the hotel. Well, obviously by the time he got back to where he was supposed to pick Mark up, Mark decided, oh, the heck with it, we're gonna walk. And he walked. I was in the hotel, in my room. Of course, I had a little shot of Grand Marnier, which usually helps me set the night off. You know, and I'm an early riser, and I go down early. You know, so it was maybe 8:30, I think, or so. So I'm in my room, and I got a phone call from a high-level executive, someone who was supposed to be the CEO or CEO of something. And but you know, I know exactly what he was, but you know, I still to this day don't talk too much about it. So, but anyway, he calls me and he asked me, where's no, the first thing he said, where are you? That was wrong. Okay. You know, it's not the message sometimes, it's always how the message is delivered and who's delivering the message. So that message was delivered at the wrong house at the wrong time. Where are you? So I kind of, you know, I stepped back a little. I said, I'm upstairs in my room. Why? Where are you? And then he said, well, where's Mark Munoz? And second buzzer wrong. That was 2. So jokingly, I said, I really don't know, don't care. And the fact that he didn't make weight, his big ass should be walking back to the hotel. That's exactly what I said, joking. And it was said to me, well, no, you're the one that should be walking back to the hotel. And the buzzer went off for the 3rd time. Okay. And that was the 3rd and the last time. Now, I don't know what kind of podcast this is you got, son. So I'm going to keep my language nice as I can because your parents might see this or somebody. So when he said that, then I gave it to him. I felt as though that person, when he said to me, you should have walked and let the fighter, first of all, he questioned my decision making. He questioned my work ethics. He questioned my integrity. And he questioned me, which he was not even in the right authority to do that. Okay, my boss was Dana White. Period. And the way he approached it, the way he came at it, so he threw a right, and I threw a hook. But then behind that hook, I had another right and another left and another right and another hook and another right, and it didn't stop, and I threw another one. And by the time I was done, I was on the phone by myself. Cooler heads could have prevailed, but they didn't. And I just told them exactly how I felt and told him exactly what he could or should do. And that was it.
Just like you said, your upper man was Dana White. Have you spoke to him after the incident? And when's the first time you guys had an encounter?
Yes, I saw Dana. This incident happened, I think, in 2015. 2015. I think in February. I didn't see Dana for almost a year because they were moving. When I left and I told that young man what to do with his words, I came home to Philadelphia. So at the time, the UFC was on full blast and they were moving around and they were bouncing around. So we had no chance to meet or communicate. And honestly, he didn't call me, I didn't call him. Why? I couldn't give you a good answer on that today, but he didn't and I didn't. But I did see him about a year later, but by that time it was, that was almost a year. I saw him at an event in Atlantic City, I think. We were cordial with each other, but that was it.
Stars like Conor McGregor, what do you have to say?
But if there's any, I'm looking for the word karma. If there's any karma in it, that young man who was supposedly the chief executive officer of whatever SH he was, 3 weeks later, after I left, about 3 weeks later, they did a fight in Houston. And my understanding now, I wasn't there, so I'm saying what I heard, and that's usually not a good thing to repeat. But when you hear something, that's not good in court, okay? But I was told that the fight went off, and at the end of the night, the two champions lost, and one champion was sent to the hospital by him, and he was the one that was in the back trying to coordinate stuff that he effed up by getting into it with me and me leaving. So he was back there trying to coordinate stuff, and the fighters got hurt and went to the hospital. Somehow, the fighters got missed and ended up staying at the hospital and not liking it, not appreciating it. If I was there, that shit would not have happened, plain and simple. But it did happen. In my understanding, the fighters expressed that to Dana White, either the following Monday or however or whenever they expressed it. And that following week, that young man was fired. He was let go. Now, did that all kind of fall into place together? I don't know, but he got fired. He lost his job and he's gone. And I haven't seen him since.
Stars like Conor McGregor and Ronda Rousey have came out and said that you're a big part in the UFC's upbringing. Have you keep contact with the stars, or do you still talk to them?
I still talk to just about, at some form, just about everybody. I've seen just about everybody. I mean, it's been 5 years now, and I am still very active in MMA. Right now, I am presently doing a show on MMA Junkie called Legends to Legends that I have what I call OG chatter. It's not an interview, it's a chat where I talk to a legend, and most of the people that who are legends and that I do interviews with, I've spoken to or I've worked with. the majority of them. If I've spoken to 9 guys, I've worked with 8 of them. So the conversations we have are pretty legitimate, and it's called Legends to Legends on MMA Junkie. Now I'm pulling the shameless plug for myself right now, but with that, I stay on the phone and I stay communicating. You know, once I left, I started to brand myself, as you can see. You know, early on when you first opened, you were saying how Joe Rogan calls me babysitter to the star. Well, that name stuck. Okay, it was babysitter to the stars, babysitter to the stars, and then at some point, you know, when I left or was leaving, or when I left, you know, I needed to move on, and I needed to keep moving. And babysitter to the stars was, to me, it was a little harder catch than Burt Watson. So I created my company, Burt Watson Promotions, and I'm putting myself out there with my own name, and everything I do now, all social media and everything, is Burt Watson Promotions instead of babysitter to the stars. Even though I love that, because Joe Rogan doesn't give everybody a nickname, but he did. But so with that, I still coordinated events. I've worked with Alliance MMA and a lot of other regional promotions that I would go in. Somebody would call me in to come in and coordinate events for them, you know, and stuff like that. So that, with that being said, I'm saying that to say that, yes, I still communicate with a lot of people. I communicate with George St. Pierre. I've spoken recently. Not by phone, but I just communicated with Rich Franklin. I've talked to Matt Hughes just recently. Randy Couture. So yes, I still keep the lines of communications wide open with all the fighters. Hey man, working with fighters was a blessing for me. And it was probably one of the best things that's ever happened to me. And they let me into their fraternity. They respected me, and I totally respected them. And the respect for them was taking care of them and making sure they had everything that they needed, everything that they were supposed to get, all the respect that they were supposed to get. So I you know, they let me into that fraternity, and I created that bond with them. So I keep that line wide open, and I'm glad, because I still communicate with all of them.
Just like you said, it's been 5 years since it happened.
Yes.
Have you ever considered going back to the UFC?
I haven't. When you say considered, that's probably not my choice. That would be a choice for Dana White to do. If I got a phone call and they said, come on back to work, let's try to get something done, or let's go get something done, I answer my phone for everybody. You know, I answer my phone, I answer my messages. And if they called today to say, let's go to work, I'm going to work. You know, work is work, and work's not a grudge. You know, and if you do something on a job that shows that you definitely couldn't handle the job, or that you weren't doing a good job, then it might be something to think about. But I always thought that I did a good enough job for somebody to call me back to do that job again.
On Saturday night, we have a rematch that a lot of fans have been waiting for, McGregor versus Poirier. What are your predictions for this matchup?
Well, this is actually, I think that this is their second fight. The last fight was 5 years ago. They fought 5 years ago. And, you know, I respect both guys. You can already see them dancing around that answer already. You see that, don't you? I like both guys. I respect both guys. I think it's going to be a great fight. And this is just a personal opinion. The first fight they had, at the time, Conor McGregor was on the way or just at the tip of, he was no longer Conor, he was Conor McGregor, you know, and sometimes when you get to that point, that's a heck of a ride. And it turned the lights on real quick, you know, and sometimes when the lights go on, some people's lights go out. Sometimes when the lights go on, everybody's lights doesn't get bright. And sometimes when those lights go on, everybody doesn't like them on, or is not used to having them on. I think the first fight they had, those lights got real bright for both of them. So they reacted to it. And were they used to it? I don't think either one of them was totally used to the magnitude that that fight had generated and had gotten to. So, you know, you put all those things into the equation because there's a lot going on in the fighter's head all week, you know, all month in the training. But I think both of them are very good fighters. They both have good skill sets. They're both pretty good strikers. And taking a shot, they both have fairly good ground game. I think that maybe Dustin's is a little different than Conor's, but they're both very strong. And I think you're going to see a competitive fight.
Right now, arguably the best UFC fighter, Khabib, is retired. He said after Saturday night he'll see if he's going to come back or not. What do you think Khabib's going to do with his future, and how do you think the UFC game is going to be without him?
I think that Khabib needed a rest. You know, he was on a tremendous streak. He was on a tremendous run. He lost his father. His father passed away, which is devastating to a lot of people. You know, so he had all those things working against his mindset, which he needed was a total mindset, and he had those things working against him. So since he didn't have those things working for his mindset, he just know that he needed time off. He figured he needed time to digest those things. So he took that time off. I'm thinking that he took the time off that he needed. He took the time off to grieve. He took the time off to rest his head because that train was moving real fast for him as well. You know, those lights were getting real bright, you know, so, but again, when he says that I'm going to look at this fight and see what happens, you know, that's not a complete retirement, you know, and I think that the excitement around this fight is enough to, and he's there. I think he's still there. I know he was there because his cousin fought. So, you know, when you're around that kind of stuff and you're able to compete immediately, you know, so many guys are around that and can't compete and want to compete. But when you're around it and you can totally compete, and him just walking in and out of a dressing room without walking in and out of a dressing room into the cage, might, you know, that stirs you up a little bit. So
I know this is a tough question, but I want to know, what is your dream boxing matchup and your dream UFC matchup?
Oh, my dream boxing matchup. Now, is this people that are boxing right now?
All time.
Or all time?
All time.
All time. I would have loved to see Deontay Wilder against Muhammad Ali, Joe Frazier against Tyson Fury. I would have loved to see those. Now Joshua is pretty good, but I'd like to see the length and the height and the reach of Ali and Wilder. I'd like to see those two, and Fury being a guy who fights down, you know, but knows how to box, but would rather have you up in here. It's gonna get Joe Frazier up in there, and that's unbelievable. I'd like right. I would say that, and it's not. I think the weight classes may be a little different, and everybody says, "Oh, Conor and Khabib, or Dustin and Conor again," but I'd like to see Damian Maia, who I think is probably one of the best BJJ practitioners in the business. I'd like to see him and Khabib kind of. Although there's weight classes, there's a difference, you know. But if that doesn't work out, to see Dustin Poirier and Khabib, or Khabib and Conor again, I'd love to see that.
That's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Hey man, I appreciate you. Thank you very much for the invite. Hey man, you know what the deal is. You know what the deal is, and you know you gotta fight your fight, because this is what we do, why we do it, baby. Because it's your night, your fight, and you need to go get it right, baby. And when it's time to go to work, it's time to go to work. And you know what that means when it's time to go to work? We rolling! Yeah! All night long. Ooh.